It is Tuesday, and we do have some friends in the studio today for our Taylor Roundup, the Director of Communications for the City of Taylor. And he brought guests.
I brought guests. Absolutely.
Let me introduce to everyone on the radio, Daniel Seguin.
Thank you so much, Steve. Happy to be here again on a bright and shiny Tuesday morning.
We're very glad. It's not bright and shiny. That's the most overcast, dreary looking, I hope it rains day ever.
See, I like that kind of day, though. It kind of makes you want to curl up in your windowless office at City Hall with a cup of warm, hot chocolate. And,
that's probably a little more information than a radio audience wants to hear. But, Daniel, this is your, what is it, third or fourth week that we've started this?
Yeah, fourth week
that we've started this. And what's the talk around town? Are you getting a lot of good feedback?
You know, I'm hoping you have some for me because I keep asking folks, what do you think? And they haven't seen it in person. Now, they have seen our recap videos, and we're getting a lot of positive feedback there.
Okay, well,
so
that's a start.
We want people to join on the show here live in the mornings on Tuesdays.
Well, we appreciate folks tuning in, and we appreciate the sponsors, and we appreciate everybody in Rockdale that's made us feel Rockdale. In Taylor, I don't know where I am today. Eventually, all this gunk is going to be gone, and I'm going to be back to normal. But the city
I got to say, we need a little more coverage in Taylor of the signal, man. You know,
yeah, well,
we just need a little bit more reach.
Thank you for putting that out there for me, as if I don't hear that every single day. But look, speaking of that, when you have 57,000 downloads of your app, people are listening. Radio has evolved from just terrestrial signal to a lot of different ways. There are people right now getting ready for Lexi's polka show that are listening on their computers at home.
Absolutely.
So we have a listen live button there, and then we have the app, of course, and then we do have the radio station. And much like dealing with governmental entities, sometimes it takes a little while for things to move forward. We are in the process of doing some upgrades, but the wheels move real slow at a federal level in order to do that. So it's a work in progress.
Absolutely.
It's a work in progress.
Absolutely.
Last time I saw you, Food Dudes.
Food Dudes.
You were there.
I was there, Steve, and it was one of the biggest showings of support that I have seen since I've been here in Taylor so far, of community gathering together for a cause. And I think that part was amazing.
And that was your first one?
First one.
Mine too. And I was the same way. I was really impressed with all the business leaders that I saw there. Of course, you saw most of the politicians running for office, because wherever three or more are gathered, they shall arrive, right?
Yeah.
But it was just a great turnout. I mean, very community, and that's what community is all about, especially in a town like Taylor, that everybody seems to know everybody.
It really is. And you know, one of the most exciting things for me, Steve, is that I walked away with a basket of goodies for my little ones to all dress up like ducks, and I'm so excited. They are already donning. I've got onesies, and I've got blankets, and I've got little duck-themed items that are now adorning the house. So I feel like, you know, even though I didn't go to Taylor High, I feel like a duck all of a sudden.
Well, you should.
It's pretty wonderful.
I mean, you are kind of one of the head ducks at the city. Well, look, you brought guests with you.
I did. So we have with us today Scott Dunlop. Scott, welcome to the show, and this is your first time on the radio as well.
Mm-hmm.
Scott is our Director of Development Services, and so we really wanted to talk a little bit about development in Taylor. You know, why we regulate development in the first place. You know, is development costing us money, and if so, how much? What developments are in process right now? All those details. So that's why we've got Scott on the show today, and we're happy to have you. So welcome.
Welcome, Scott.
Yes, welcome.
Poor Scott is thinking, the last time I was in this office, it was interesting, and today is going to be much more pleasant than that.
I had a good time last time. It
Did
was okay.
you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I hear the exit out the door was the worst experience of it all, because he got escorted to the back door.
I did. That's right. You're not going out the front door. Well, look. We have a beautiful sign on the building and you could see it for miles and miles at night when we're supposed to have it on. So that's all good stuff. So, Scott, tell us what you do for the city of Taylor.
Sure. So I'm the Development Services Director. I've been with the city for about 8 months now. I was with the city of Manor prior to that for 10 years. So I'm over permitting, planning, and code enforcement. So we handle all the new developments coming into the city, new tenant occupancies, new businesses, new houses, all that, new industrial projects. We coordinate a lot with engineering, public works for all the utilities, roadway improvements, you name it. Development services is probably part of it.
Okay, were you part of bringing Chick-fil-A to Manor?
I was.
Okay, well then there you heard it, ladies and gentlemen. Scott's first project is a Chick-fil-A here in Manor.
I do
In
have-
Manor.
in Taylor.
In Taylor.
He was in
Taylor.
Manor. See,
Yes.
I'm telling you. I got it.
I have heard
Coffee.
that Chick-fil-A follows Panda Express, and Panda Express is coming to Taylor.
Is it really?
They are. So, yeah, they had their pre-construction meeting the other week, so they should be starting here anytime now.
Well, look at that.
There you go.
Good-
You heard it
there-
first on KRXT.
You
Yeah,
did that
but-
Panda Express, and here comes because you did a good job over in Manor. Because if you drive 290 past Elgin, I mean, there's a huge HEB going in over there.
Yes.
Yeah.
HEB, Home Depot, Burlington, TJ Maxx.
Well, good. I hope your success there translates to success here in Taylor, Texas.
That is the plan.
One of the questions I've had that's just always burned to my mind, I'm a big student of philosophy and studying why we do things and how we approach city government, especially. And so I'm curious, Scott, can you tell us a little bit about your philosophy? Why do you think we regulate development? Why don't cities just let property owners build whatever they want?
Sure. One of the main things is building codes. So making sure that buildings are safe. So we have our building codes and then fire codes. So, if there's ever any incidents, people are able to escape, and that's all good. Environmental. So especially in Taylor, drainage is a big issue. So the city is constantly repairing drainage. And so as new development comes on, we want to make sure that we're not impacting existing drainage areas, and that, the detention ponds are being built correctly and the water is being discharged appropriately. So existing property owners are not impacted by that new development. Economics, we want to make sure that we're balancing our residential development with our commercial development. Because if you get too heavy on the residential side, it starts overburdening the property owners with their tax rates. Because typically residential doesn't have the same support with the taxes as commercial does. There's a lot more services that go into residential versus commercial, but they'll pay the same tax rate. So the more commercial you get in, you can lower your tax rate. And additionally, that brings in sales tax if it's retail, franchise taxes, and that all helps to lower that property tax rate. And then lastly, with zoning, so we look at making sure that uses are compatible with each other, and if there needs to be buffers. So if we're going to have industrial development next to that residential development, we want to kind of make sure that the residential areas are protected and preserved, and then also maintaining our historic areas. So Taylor has an amazing downtown, and we want to make sure that as development occurs in that is meeting the historic standards that are applicable. And so that's why we regulate.
So you're saying you're trying to keep the concrete plants out of our backyards and keep our taxes lower. Is that
Correct.
what you're saying?
That is
I
the
think
main
he
goal.
said that in a lot of words, didn't he?
Yes.
Sorry, I'll talk a bit too much. Apologize.
It's all right, Scott. It's challenging to to ask questions and to get feedback like that. So, my first advice is just take your time.
Sure.
You don't have to spit it all out in one question, but people do need to realize that a residential property costs a lot more in city service than a business does. Right? We talked about that a couple of weeks ago.
We did,
rooftop-
yeah. One home doesn't really even give us enough taxes to maintain just the street right in front of it.
Right, because
mind-boggling.
there's usually $1.50 of service, and then for a business, we usually spend about 80 cents.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between a commercial property and a residential property kind of makes up the difference. And that difference keeps property taxes as low as they possibly can be.
It
with
does.
providing quality service.
So theoretically, the more businesses and the more economic activity we have in Taylor, the lower taxes we'll be able to get. Obviously, we still have to fund, bringing bringing current infrastructure up to snuff, right, with modern
Sure.
standards. But once that's done, right, we should be able to maintain at a much lower rate than we would if it were just residential.
You and I were both in the chamber board meeting yesterday, and it was announced that a piece of property that the economic development folks had been sold, and that surplus or that revenue from that piece of property that they owed nothing on was going to be poured back into drainage, but water
Water and
water and
wastewater are the
wastewater
biggest
projects, and it was like $3 million. Is that a close number?
You know what I wasn't, to be completely honest.
Oh,
fully
look at you.
focused when I
You
was in
were
the meeting.
muted.
I was.
Okay, well, you need to show up.
Multitasking, Steve, is important in our work because we don't have the highest staffing levels. But I will say what I heard is that they sold the property for $10 million.
And all that money was going to go back. So my number's way low. All that money is going to go back into water and wastewater projects.
That's what they said, which is really exciting for us here at the city. One of the main reasons, like we Scott mentioned, is being able to make it so that existing residents aren't footing the bill for new developments coming to town.
Sure. And those new developments, which we all are encouraging, right? Everybody wants to see that positive growth. And in our candidate forum tonight that we're going to have, I'm sure that's going to come up as a big topic, is what type of growth do we want to see, and how do we, grow smartly,
Right.
with the greatest opportunity for quality of life, because that's why people move to a community, right? Great schools, quality of life, opportunity, both in employment and entertainment and all those things.
And also cost of living, right? It's a lot cheaper to live here in Taylor even now than it is to live in Austin or Round Rock or Georgetown.
Sure.
So that's an important element that we don't want to lose sight of.
Absolutely
And we need
not.
to make sure we're trying to keep that cost of living low. So that really leads me to one of the questions that I had for Scott is, a lot of folks feel like taxes are going up, water rates are going up, and they attribute that to the point when Samsung first announced and all this development has been coming. And so from a resident perspective, it seems like we're footing the bill for all these new developments. So can you talk about how we help fund improvements to these new developments and ensure that taxpayers who are existing residents don't foot the bill?
Yes. So new development ideally should be paying for itself. The city council, they do have discretion if the project is of interest and they believe the return will be great enough. They can offer certain incentives. They'll work with the Economic Development Corporation to vet those and make sure that is appropriate, our financial consultants. So it's very, very select that they do that.
And I'm excited you brought that up because we're actually bringing on Ben White next week. Little pitch for next week about economic development incentives
great. Yeah.
in more detail.
Ben's awesome.
So
Yeah.
that's great that you mentioned that.
Yeah. And so that's usually actually geared towards the industrial and commercial developments as well. So again, bringing in those jobs and helping to offset those taxes. And so for new development, and it's supposed to pay for itself. And so the city will assess impact fees. So we have water, wastewater, and roadway impact fees. By state law, we can only collect 50% of those water and wastewater impact fees. So the state has already told us, hey, we don't want to stifle development, so you can't charge the full amount of those new capital projects that could be spurred by this new development, but we can at least assess at least 50% of that. So that's why you'll see cities issue bonds for water, wastewater projects sometimes, because the cities, under state law, can't recover all of that money. For roadway impact fees, we can. So we have a pretty robust roadway impact fee program. If developers are constructing roads part of that plan, they can have those credited. But again, typically, development will pay for itself.
So you're saying there is some degree of funds that we do have to subsidize for some of these developments, but the calculation works out that in the end, at the end of the day, they end up paying for themselves in the long run. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah, to get all their infrastructure in the ground, that is almost always on the developer's dime. We are doing a fiscal impact analysis model. And so as new developments come in, we'll be plugging those developments in to see what their potential tax revenue to the city is and then what our maintenance cost would be. And so we can determine, if it's a far-flung project and they're needing a 2-mile long wastewater line extension, we could plug it in and say, hey, those numbers don't work. Like, you're not putting enough tax revenue on the ground to support this infrastructure. So you either need to change the scope of your project, or your project may not be approved, or may not be approved right now. And so we're just making sure that we can grow smart. And
Well, look, the thing about a road, everybody talks about roads. And in Taylor, Texas, as long as I've been around here, the biggest challenge has been road maintenance. It's easy to put in a road the first time. That's the least expensive part of building a road, is when it first goes down, because it's the maintenance over the life of that road that costs, and it never goes away, because unless the road gets tore up and it gets returned to natural, it's going to cost.
Well, and the soils, especially here in Taylor, are bringing that additional challenge.
Sure, because
something that I read is they move up to 10 inches a year.
Black gumbo is what we call this here, the soil that we have, and that soil does shift with rain and drought conditions, and we see that swing every year. It gets a little worse, it seems, and that's going to cause the road base to shift around. So, I think that Scott's department sometimes gets a bad rap because what they're trying to do is do the right thing. And, if everybody would just take a look at what is the right thing, Scott and his department and what the city's trying to do is do it with some thought behind it, not just throw it out there. There are cities, and I'm not going to name names, but you can look and see the cities that just said, come on in, go, and look where they are today and the trouble they're in because they didn't take the time to do it the right way to start with, right?
Yeah, that bill comes due.
That bill does come due. So, what Scott and his department really are trying to do is look at every angle and really put some thought into it and do the best that they can, forecast it out 20 years. And how hard is that? That's a challenge to do, because nobody 20 years ago would have thought that we would be where we are today, sitting in this studio talking about an international company right down the road and all that entails, and a 79 corridor report, right, that talks about the region. And look what Rockdale just announced with 1,800 new jobs at the old Alcoa facility, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, we need industrial jobs. We need a well-rounded economic development base that Ben will come on and talk about next week. But there's planning that goes into that. So just because you want your certain project and you want to, I don't want to say throw it up, but you want to get it rushed through without really thought into it. Well, that's what Scott's team does. Put
They do,
some thought into
and
it.
Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of these developers, they come with pre-designed plans. They already have the kinds of houses that they want to build, those house plans that fit in other cities, that are already approved through building codes and standards and things like that. And they want to be able to just pick that up, copy and paste into other communities where financially the numbers work out and they can turn around and make a quick profit for their investors. Is that often what y'all are running into and getting resistance from?
Yeah, we frequently, especially with the volume home builders, they'll want to come in and do their typical subdivisions, which we can work with them. We are working with them, but there are tweaks, and we want to make sure that the development is in line with the city's visions and goals and is financially sustainable, so we're not overburdening our existing taxpayers. So we do work with them over time to amend what their plans are, so it's good for everyone.
Taylor has a beautiful downtown, in my opinion, right, with all these historic buildings. I'll give you an example. Round Rock, that Walmart that's there on 79 as you're coming into town. Walmart had a cookie cutter, here's what we want to build. City of Round Rock said, we don't think so. We want this to be more community focused. So they redrew their plans for that Walmart, and that's the only Walmart really kind of started the whole movement. Nobody wants to look at a great big rectangle box just dropped in your neighborhood. They kind of made it more aesthetically pleasing, and it kind of fits more into the neighborhood, so you're not just staring at the back of a concrete tilt wall building.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. And I don't know if we have standards like that for our commercial corridors, but it's really cool to see a lot of cities move in that direction where they're making sure that new development fits the look, the feel, of their small town.
Who wouldn't want that, right? I mean, it's not like business is coming. We know that growth is coming. Let's prepare for it so that it makes the most sense for who we are uniquely.
Exactly.
You know?
Well, speaking of, Scott, can you tell us who's coming? We're kind of, there's a lot of interest in knowing, what developments are happening. There's, constantly when folks see dirt turning,
everybody wants to know, and we know Panda Express.
Yeah, we know Panda Express.
I kind of led with maybe a little bit exciting one, but
that's okay.
We were working on about 41 large projects in all various stages of the project process.
Whoa. You just said 41 projects.
Large projects.
And that's commercial or residential or
commercial
both?
And industrial. Yes.
Okay.
So it's all of that.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, and so that's all the process. So from zoning entitlement through construction. We have 8 big projects under construction. So obviously Samsung, RCR, Park 79, which is an industrial project, Home 2 Suites, Castlewood, Spring Creek, which are residential projects.
What's that one down south of the loop on Main? If you're headed south on the left on 95.
That would be the...
Is that Park 79?
No, Park 79 is by the airport.
Okay.
And what is Park 79?
It's 3 industrial buildings.
Okay.
They're about 130,000 square feet, 120, and 100,000 square feet.
And these are all businesses tied to Samsung, or are these unique business?
Park 79 is spec office buildings, or spec industrial buildings. So they're intending to be occupied by Samsung suppliers.
Okay.
But a lot of RCRs being developed too with Samsung suppliers, and we have other large industrial projects around Samsung in the works too.
And RCR is that big rail park, right?
Yes,
that's over there by 3349 and 79.
Isn't it amazing how that started and where it's gotten to now? Watching that spur, everybody going, where's that going? And to see where it is today.
I'm just mind blown when I drive by and I see the massive field of Teslas all spread out and ready to be shipped. I mean, that I remember when I was a kid and seeing, and this shows you how young I am, but seeing Teslas first get on the road, and I was like, what the heck is that? And I remember looking up car brands with a T shape on the back.
I still say that about those trucks. Good gosh. That's the ugliest thing on 4 wheels, but that's just me.
But if you dream of going to space one day, Steve, you'll get excited about that truck. It's a cool truck.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I'll take a Nile Maxwell Ram any day of the week over that.
That's fair.
But 41
yes,
different and of course, how does that spread out over the city? Is it focused more one area, or what are we doing for the whole community?
Sure. Most of it is around 79, so kind of
corridor.
Filling in kind of the gap between Taylor and Hutto, heading up north, and then a little south towards 95. So the east side of the city is, that's the future development area. That's up and coming, but right now we have a lot of projects there on 79.
There's a lot of talk on social media about that part of Taylor, right? And are we going to lose the feel of that area? And how do you address that in planning? How do we work with our community to ensure that everybody's represented?
Sure. So when the city adopted their comprehensive plan, that had a lot of community input on how the city wanted to grow and the visions they wanted to achieve. And so our code is written to do that. And we're constantly looking at our code and, amending it and looking at ways we can make it easier and, keep achieving the visions of the council as council changes. But then also, on a case-by-case basis, as projects come in, we send out notices to the neighbors around it, and they can
feedback.
They can come to those meetings. They can talk to staff. They can, interact with the developers at those meetings. And so, it actually just happened at the last planning commission meeting. We had a project on County Road 403, and some of the neighbors came out and they said, hey, there's a historic cemetery nearby. How is that factored in? And, the developer wasn't there to answer those questions. So the planning commission said, we're going to postpone because we want these questions answered, but we value our community's feedback. And so that is happening now. The developer is going to be reaching out to those property owners to make some adjustments. This happened on other projects. We have a multifamily project on North Main that, again, community members showed up at those meetings and said, hey, we have these concerns. The developer was there. They met personally, talked. They came back the next meeting and they resolved their issue.
That's the way it's supposed to work, right? Look, we're bumping up at the top of the hour. We need to take a little break here. Now Jay Davis is in a row. He's got it right now. It is downtown, and we are talking with Daniel Seguin and Scott from the city of Taylor about growth and planning and zoning and how those things impact the quality of life in our community. But look, it's Easter week. The city offices are closed Friday. Is that correct for Good Friday?
We are closed Friday for Good Friday.
And will you be Easter egg hunting because of your little ones?
We will. There is an Easter egg hunt here in
Yes.
Taylor at Memorial Field on April 19th at 10 a.m.
And
That's
you
real
had all
exciting.
that listed right there to talk about, didn't you?
I happen to just have some things written down here to remember. But even before that, Steve, the Asmaris are performing at Music on Main
Is that
downtown.
Tomorrow, or is that Thursday
That's
night?
Thursday night,
Thursday
7 p.m.
And
So-
how's the crowd been for those?
there's been a couple where there was some great turnout, some where there was less so, but really it's having that opportunity for the community to come out and enjoy our downtown, enjoy some live music is huge.
Because the quality of life is another aspect of what the city does for the benefit of the entire community, right? And for the city to have built that, and that's a great place.
Oh,
over
Heritage
there.
Square is beautiful.
Heritage Square is just a neat place. And Taylor is so vibrant on a weekend. If you walk around on a Saturday here in downtown, there's a lot of stuff going on.
There's a lot.
There's
I got to
a lot
admit,
of
I was trying to plan some different events over the last few months, and I got to tell you, on a Saturday, you're hard pressed to not run into 5 or 6 other events happening across the city that you're competing with.
Absolutely. And the city does a great job in its stewardship with Parks and Rec and what they do and how everything that we tie together to make our community what it is.
It is, and our Parks and Recreation Department does a fantastic job with the limited resources that they have. And I'm excited to hear coming up here at the next council meeting Thursday this week, they're going to be presenting some proposed new projects across the park system, improvements to our existing parks. And a lot of people have been asking about, putt-putt, and is putt-putt coming back in Murphy Park?
Did I see somebody was actually taking that project on and restoring some of that?
Steve, it's really a collaborative effort. This last go round, the National Honor Society at the school has been working to paint some of all the holes that are there. The city's done some work on concrete and some other things. There have been some folks trying to raise money to help improve that space. But Parks Department's coming with a proposal to council this week that will include suggestions on improvements and opening that back up to the community.
Well, that would be a fun thing to do. We could have some fundraisers there, play a little round of golf, and have bet on your favorite golfer kind of thing. We could call it the Taylor Masters tournament.
The Taylor Masters at the Putt-Putt Masters.
The Putt-Putt Masters, absolutely. That would be fun.
That would be awesome. But yeah, wanted to ask Scott, are there any developments that are considering, some quality of life type stuff that are in the pipeline or entertainment and that sort of thing so far? Or have we not seen that come yet? Are we waiting on additional population for those to actually happen?
You're probably, waiting for a bit more in population for some kind of big entertainment centers, but definitely in terms of the recreation side, all of the new subdivisions that are planned have great amenity spaces. That's a big thing for the city. We require 10% civic space within each new development, which that's pretty high. So we're really,
when you say civic space, Scott, define that.
so that's your parks, squares,
Okay.
plazas, open space. Your where you can go recreate and play and have a
So
good time with your family.
open green space is what we would call that, right? That could be utilized for a community pool or any of those type of amenities.
Some of the ones that I've seen, I'm really excited about and hope they do come to fruition. But they've got, they interconnect to our existing trail network. They'll have amphitheaters and beautiful fountains, gardens to walk through, soccer fields and basketball courts, and just it goes above and beyond kind of some of the developments we've seen over the last couple decades in Taylor.
Well, we're coming up on the summer months, right? And we know the summer months when school is out, mischief ensues, and we need everything we can think of to keep kids entertained, whether it's midnight basketball or whatever, just to keep kids, something to do.
Something to do.
Something to do.
Well, you mentioned we had 41 kind of big projects in the works. Can you tell us how many homes is that actually, what are we looking at, and how much commercial space, industrial space?
Yeah. So I do have the numbers. I wrote them down. But don't necessarily be scared by these because some of them are entitlements, so they may take a while. This is also, build out takes a while, so this isn't showing up tomorrow.
Sure.
But there's 8,520 dwelling units, of which 5,549 are multifamily, so that could just mean like a 4-unit, a 5-unit, but also 3-story garden-style type apartments. 2,971 single-family, so that's the residential side. And then just over 1 million square feet of office and retail, and 13.5 million square feet of industrial, which the big one in the room is Samsung, which is about 6 million of that. And then 817 hotel rooms.
Wow. So
of course the hotel rooms are going to kick off. One thing the county does really well out there at that park, there's a lot of regional tournaments that go on out there. And those folks, anytime we could put a head in a bed,
yes,
a head in a bed, a hotel, motel, hot tax, there's a lot we can do with that to improve and do events.
There is. And when someone stays the night, they're not just paying for their hotel room. They're also buying dinner here in Taylor. They're also buying, lunch, breakfast provided, obviously, at the hotel. But, they're spending money at our shops. They're coming downtown. They're exploring what all Taylor has to offer, as well as the region. It's not just Taylor.
And one of the things that Scott's job, and I think it's the balance of local retail versus national retail. And, we're a huge proponent here because we're a small business. And local ownership, local participation, every dollar that we spend here in Taylor turns over 8 or 9 times, whether it be for a little league team or the FFA or the 4-H or whatever. So keeping dollars at home. But you also have to be very considerate about national chains when they want to come in, and those folks can be great community partners or they could be horrific community partners. Okay. And Scott, your guys try to find a good balance of that so that there's plenty of opportunity for everybody for everything and check all the boxes. And that's not an easy job to do because all the little small retail shops here depend on us supporting them. And restaurants, you mentioned Panda Express coming to town. You can have too much of one kind of restaurant and not enough of another. And everybody complains about that, right?
You can. And what I've seen in other towns is quite amazing when some of these chains come in. It doesn't just... a lot of folks with local restaurants sometimes get scared. And they're thinking, these big chains are going to come in. They're going to steal all my business. Well, what we've seen in other cities, and I'm sure Scott can also speak to this as well, but what I've even personally seen is that the actual amount of spending in the city increases in total because of that. And it's not that it takes away from local businesses, but more folks come into the city, and folks traveling through will stop more often and eat. And so that will begin to have some spillover effects in some of our small businesses. Is that what you've seen too, Scott?
Yeah.
And I would assume, too, that eventually we're going to see some development on the loop, right? You're going to see that area as it's a bypass for downtown, right? And everybody talks about loops. Rockdale desperately needs a loop, They've talked about it. You know, people, the traffic on 79 there in the middle of town can be horrific. So everybody talks about, and so that is going to be a development corridor for us. And we just want to find the right mix of growth, right? That perfect balance, and that's a challenge.
It is a challenge.
Yes.
And Scott, how long, as a business comes in, they want to grow, they want to help invest in Taylor, how long does it take for those businesses, whether it be, you know, a small downtown shop or a multi-family development or huge development on the outskirts of town? How long does it take, you know, from when we first hear about it until it's built?
I think I need another hour or so.
That is a long question.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables that go into that. So if you're a downtown shop and you're coming into an existing space, you just need a CO.
Okay.
They'll come in, they'll make sure the building is still safe up to fire code. You can operate your business, if you're not planning any other changes to it. So it could be very quick. You get your bigger developments. The RCR, when it was coming in, they have to start probably from the beginning. It's like annexation, zoning, platting, site development, building permits. And that could take some time. But again, it's kind of going back to making sure that it meets the city's visions and goals. It's properly built, following those building codes. It's, being an asset to the city and not a detriment to it. And so there is a lot of thought that goes into it. And there's a lot of variables that go into on the developer side as well too, because projects will be announced. Developers get really excited. They're trying to build investment. They're trying to maybe sell some houses or pre-lease houses, and so they'll put out their marketing for that. And then you wonder where'd it go? It didn't go anywhere.
Right.
Sometimes the market demands come in, their own financing. So it's not always the city impeding things. Sometimes developers can be their own worst enemy, but we love to work with them. We always invite everyone here and come meet with us, and we'll get you through that process. And we really want to see some dirt turning.
So when do you expect these 8,500 units to be? When is Taylor 8,500 people more? When does that happen?
Based on the size of these projects, I mean, these are 10, 15-year build-outs.
Oh, wow.
Because they'll do, you get your big subdivisions that may have, 400 houses. They'll do segments at a time where it's, we're going to build 40 here, and then we'll do another 60. And then they do like one of those a year. And this is developers, especially on the residential side, commercial too, but, they're very keen into their financing. So they don't want to overextend themselves and then get stuck with a subdivision that's not built, or, you have your streets and your infrastructure, but then, there's no one there to buy the house. And they don't want to be in that situation. So they're very conservative in making sure that they're only putting down enough houses for what the market's demanding. Similarly with commercial, they want to make sure the rooftops are there, that the disposable income is there, that the people are there to spend the money, and that the services they're providing are what the community needs.
So it's kind of like a dance, is what I'm
Yes.
hearing.
Well,
we have a little bit of all sides.
And look, Rome, famous quote, Rome was not built in a day. And this program cannot last forever. Scott, thank you for being a part of the program today. We appreciate that. Daniel, good job.
Thank you.
Daniel Seguin, the Communications Director for the City of Taylor, right here on your Tuesday edition of Hometown Highlights.